Hey, I'm Mike Joseph, and thank you for listening to Detoxicity, a show by men, about men, but for everyone. I hope you enjoy the content of this podcast, and I want to let you know about a few things you can do to support us and our mission to challenge traditional notions of masculinity and create a more communicative, positive, and loving environment for all. You can subscribe to Detoxicity on any podcast platform that you use to listen. We are available just about everywhere. Also, don't hesitate to rate and comment, as these help us move up in the podcast rankings. I'm on social media, or at least I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok as DetoxPod Guy. Feel free to drop me a follow. Now I have a Patreon page, yay! And Patreon gives you the opportunity to get cool merch and exclusive episodes of this podcast in exchange for subscribing. Go to patreon.com/detoxicitypod to find out more. Finally, I'd love to hear from you. Whether you found an episode of the podcast particularly enjoyable or enlightening, or you know someone who'd be a great guest, or you'd like to offer constructive criticism, or if you yourself would like to be on the podcast, hit me up. Reach out to me at one of the aforementioned social media channels, or if you're old school like I am, drop me an email, detoxpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and take care. So my guest for this episode is Tom DeSavia. Tom is a music industry fixture. He is a legendary A&R guy. He's an author, a musical encyclopedia, and our conversation covers so much. We talk about our collective upbringings and both of us coming into the music industry as teenagers, which is something that probably doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if those opportunities are even out there the way that those opportunities existed for he and I. We talk about how our education, or lack of quote unquote formal education, or lack of a college education, got us to where we are. We talk a lot about the music industry and how it's changed over the years, how in some ways it's unfortunately stayed the same, particularly when it comes to things like sexism and racism and substance use and mental health. We talk about Tom's sort of awakening to social issues and how he's grown by reaching out to people and getting in touch more deeply with his empathy, which is obviously something that we could all probably stand to do a little bit more. We talk about his path and, things that he has been through, things that his parents went through. It's just like a wide-ranging conversation that is based in his and my collective experience in the music industry, but then spread so far out beyond that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Without any further ado,
my name is Tom DeSavia. I'm a longtime music industry A&R guy, and I've also co-authored a couple of books. And I'm a generally neurotic, nervous, insecure, scared person, human, with a lot of imposter syndrome.
Wow. Okay. Well, those are topics that come up a lot.
Perfect.
We'll dig into that. But, what was your entry point into music? Because during our, sort of pre-conversation, we talked about both having been in the music industry from like a young age. So I just want to know what your jumping off point was.
Yeah, it was funny. Honestly, like as a kid, little kid, like starting at like 2 years old, I didn't care about anything other than records. I was obsessed with records. My brother and sister are 12 and 14 years older than me and were discouraged from buying records when they were kids. So they found this loophole with their accident brother.
Okay.
So I got that. I'm 12 years younger than my youngest sibling. And so they would buy me the records. So by the time I was like 6 or 7 years old, that was their loophole, how to get them in the house. Like the gifts for our brother. So by the time I was like 7 or 8 years old, I had your basic, foundational record collection, of all the records that were coming out in the years, and the ones before I had like all the Beatles and Stones records, or the really popular ones, I should say, and a lot of Stax stuff and a lot of singer-songwriter stuff, and just it was this great sort of sampling platter. My parents were from a much older generation. From them, we had this box of 78 records, and they were left from a deceased aunt. And I remember just pouring over all those. So I was listening to equal parts like, Black Sabbath and, Jimmy Dorsey. There was
Wow. Okay.
whatever records. I just was fascinated with records. When I was about 10 years old, I remember my dad's buddy walking by. So I would bring all my records out and lay them out in front of the family console stereo. And he just walked by and very casually flipped off the statement like, "Hey, you should get a job in the music business. You get free records that way," which just, brain exploded. Wait, that's a job? And then I had a really, really amazingly supportive father. My dad was a great figure in my life. And he was the kind of guy that was, do whatever you do. You'll never work a day in your life kind of guy. If you want to be a garbage man, be the best garbage man in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to. And so from when I was then I started to wonder what a role in music would be like. I came from a very civilian family. I mean, my dad worked for Social Security. My mom was, a housewife raising three kids. And, my family was, I came from a full Italian family. So there's a lot of postmen and truck drivers in there. And
Sure. Very blue collar.
very blue collar. And, but my dad, every once in a while, like it seemed like once a month or so, he would swing by the newsstand in town and just randomly picking up a copy of Billboard or some other kind of music magazine and be just like, read it, look at it, understand it. So I would just pour over billboards when I was like 11 years old going, oh my God, there's a job. These people that are sitting with my favorite musicians and they don't look as cool, but they're hanging out with them. This is awesome. So I've got to figure that out. And then really what happened, Mike, was when I was 13, I met the cat who became my best friend and is my oldest friend for life, a guy named Adam Levy, who's a brilliant, brilliant jazz guitarist. And we were 13 and he wanted to get into music and I wanted to get into the music business. And his grandfather was this amazing composer named George Weil. And he was as close as we got to the music business. He was an older gentleman, but he had significantly written the music, not the lyrics, but the music to The Most Wonderful Time of the Year, the holiday song, and kind of more importantly, the theme to Gilligan's Island.
What?
Yes. So it was it was the coolest guy I could meet at 13 years old. And he was awesome. And he would sort of tell us about the music business and what it was like. And he'd been in it for years. And so he had, very long-winded, but I'll wrap it up quickly. He had gone to teach at a school called Dick Grove School of Music, which was here in the San Fernando Valley. And my buddy Adam, who was the reason I stopped playing guitar too, because when I met Adam, I realized some people are born to play guitar. And then I'm like the guy who can't cook, can't play guitar, can't do any of this, but can learn, and it's sort of generic and bad. And so as soon as I met him, I just threw it out. Adam went on to play guitar for Norah Jones on those first couple of records and write on those albums.
Wow. Okay.
And play guitar on the Tracy Chapman, Give Me One Reason, which is amazing. So he went on to do great things. But when he was in this guitar school, he met this woman who worked at a magazine called Cashbox that's now very defunct. And she said, I need an intern. And I was 19 years old. And I was like, please, whatever you can do. And he got me this internship, or ADD, backtracking.
It's all good.
At that point, I decided my role in the music business was as a journalist, because I was writing for like school papers and the local paper. And that was what I always loved writing. And I was like, okay, that's my way in. That's how I could write for a magazine. And I was reading billboards as I was a kid. I'm like, okay, someone's also writing these articles. This is a way in. So he got me the internship, which was a 1 day a week internship. And I was going in 5 days a week just because I got my foot in the door.
You loved it, yeah.
To leave. And so I was driving out from Thousand Oaks out to Hollywood every day and just having the time of my life. And the people that worked there were really kind. And, I was, the little, I was 19, and at 19, I looked 13. I was very Doogie Howser. And they just treated me really well and were, tossing me free records and free concert tickets. And in the office when a pop star would walk in, and I couldn't believe that this happened, because I should backtrack and said I didn't go to college. One, I grew up in a sort of a middle class to lower middle class family. So we didn't have the money to get me into college, really. And I certainly didn't have the grades to get me into college. I did really well in English and social studies and anything involved reading, like math and any of these, and any sort of other sort of required classes. I was just yeah, B to C student at best, Who- My dad was like, take the year off because, again, he was that kind of dad. And he was like, sort of, explore for you. I think what you want to do. And all I wanted was music. And so when I got in, I couldn't believe it. I wasn't letting go. And then just as it turned out, this job was one that didn't pay well.
Hmm.
Employees were waiting to get out of. So everyone kept quitting. It was a small staff. It was maybe 25 people, 25 people. And one day the editor came to me and a writer didn't show up. And he's like, hey, can you write this story? And I was like, I can do it, sir. And, I wrote some about a music director in Wichita or something really. And he was like, okay, you can write it. And he kept giving me options to write more and more stories. And then eventually a writer quit and they'd offer me the job. So I got the job. I couldn't believe I was a writer. But what was so funny about this company, I was 19 years old and everyone kept quitting. And the boss was like, rather than try to find someone and pay someone more money, they just kept offering other people that worked there these gigs. So by the time I was 20, I was the West Coast editor of Cashbox Magazine.
It's insane.
Might I add, not deservedly so. I should have not been the fucking editor of that magazine, but I was like, this is great. And so it sort of allowed me to get a weird little bit of exposure in the business just because I was so young and people would see me show up at things as the editor of this magazine and I looked 12 years old. And I did that for 3 years and then got offered a gig and I decided at that point I didn't want to be a writer. I didn't like being a critic specifically.
Okay.
I didn't like, and it was a weekly magazine, which it was a really hard grind. And so it wasn't really thoughtful writing. It was writing about news. It was a news writer. So it wasn't really essays as much. It was more news stories and, the artist features because it was a trade magazine were more like press releases. But there was a thing where you were expected to write reviews of music. And early on, I didn't like that because they wanted negative reviews because that's, as much of a good read as a positive review. And not saying completely, altruistic, but I always had trouble, even if I didn't like the music, criticizing music. It's like, who am I to say something that makes a million kids happy is not my thing? Like when they come out and say, I don't like this boy band. Of course I don't like this boy band. I'm an old man. I mean, like I'm talking about me now, but how am I going to, it's not being written for me.
Sure.
Why am I supposed to edit? So anyway, I want to get rid of the writing thing and got a job offer at ASCAP, which I had no idea what the fuck it was. And they'd been using sort of these unsigned band columns I was writing to search for people to sign up to ASCAP. And they said, hey,
Wow.
what's coming in? And I just came back to my people I was working with. I'm like, I just got a job offer from ASCAP. Isn't that like the bank? Isn't it like it's like a credit union or something? I know the acronym from the back of all my albums, but the guy that was working there like just went, oh my God, you got to go there because the guy that's leading his job they're offering you was there a year and he got an A&R job. And at that point, the whole kind of idea of A&R was floating around my head. I was like, oh, there's someone who actually signs musicians and makes records. And I wanted to do that, but I know I didn't have any of the skills to do that. Meaning I wasn't a musician. I was not a skilled musician. I could not, I was not a songwriter. I didn't have aspirations to do those things. I was a fan.
Right.
I was like, oh, let me get in. If this guy went there in a year, maybe this will be like my GE and I'll learn more about, being an A&R person. And so then I went in, I got the job and my plan was, okay, the guy before here stayed there for a year and I'll do the same thing. And it turned into that time a 7-year gig. And in that time, not sort of knowing what to do, I started to do these showcase series for the first time. They'd never done showcases, like showcasing unsigned bands to the industry and things. And so was doing that. And then my buddy Mike Badamy, who worked there with me, we started a little indie 7-inch label and put out some things. And we're doing okay on the like indie, the first sort of indie revival level of the 90s. And then I started to get offers to go to do A&R. And at this point, I've been spending a lot of time with a lot of bands, that I was really close with. And I was been in the studio with them, and I was taken under the wing by some really great A&R people who saw my curiosity and saw my interest in this. So I'd had some like hands-on auditing experience, I'd say, in the
Right.
studio, and it was at this era in the 90s where if you got one offer, you got 1,000. And again, I don't, to the aforementioned imposter syndrome, I'm sitting there the whole time going like, I'm the least skilled person to do this job ever, which I still kind of feel like, and not in a self-deprecating way, in a way that I don't think someone like me should be an A&R guy. As long as they're handing out jobs to idiots like me, I'll take it. But if you go to the beginning of the music business, it was musicians and composers and conductors and
Sure.
band leaders that were really signing and producing things. So I went in and I wound up taking the job at Elektra Records because two of my all-time favorite acts, which were Linda Ronstadt and the punk band X,
All right.
were both there and were both absolutely, essential DNA to my musical upbringing. Like both of them were the things that, aside from, all the, like, so the things I got as a kid that were like the foundational music things I got from my parents, I had a really good foundation of big band and country music from my dad. My dad loved like 70s country music, which was this amazing thing to just, absorb as a kid. Motown stacks, 60s, 70s rock and roll. But then it was Linda Ronstadt who was doing all these songs with these amazing songwriters. And those records were like roadmaps to me. As a kid, I'm reading it going, who's Elvis Costello? Who's Jimmy Cliff? Who's Neil Young? Who's Mick Jagger and Keith Richards?
Right.
Was finding those at like 8 years old on Linda Ronstadt records, and made me want to go seek out these other versions of these songs. And the genres were all over the place. So I was listening to literally, interpretations of, country, reggae, rock, new wave, pop, and later in her career, Mexican music, opera. It was
Right.
just, Linda Ronstadt was my college education into music. That's how I heard. I heard so much music I wouldn't have heard otherwise. A gift from my brother, who was obsessed with her.
Okay.
I would
All
have been
right.
just like my brother. And then X came around when I was 13 and just absolutely rewired everything I thought I knew to that point. I'm like, oh my God, there's something outside of AM radio out there now. What the hell is this? And so I still look at those two acts as diametrically opposed as they
Opposed as they are. Yeah, I was gonna say that. They're just very different I mean, stylistically they're very different. And also sort of in the mindset of the stereotypical music fan. Someone would think someone who likes one would not like the other.
right. You wouldn't. And it was funny. Flash forward to I did these two punk books with John Doe on the history of LA punk, and so many people in the book having nothing to do with me, like were citing Ronstadt as an example, especially the female singers, because it's funny, like because she was the first rock and roll singer that was eh, hitting arenas at that level and touring with Neil Young and playing. So especially the women in the punk scene, Jane, I believe Belinda Carlisle referenced it, certainly um, Maria McKee, who Linda Ronstadt got her band Lone Justice signed. It was all these things came in, and I was like, oh, we all kind of share this same DNA in a lot of ways. We all were fed the same thing. And then sort of marketing and advertising comes in and tells you, and that's one of the things I didn't like about punk rock was the stay in your lane
Right.
aspect of it. It's one thing I didn't like about, classic rock. It was the stay in your lane. It was the and especially growing up at that point as a kid, really a child of the 80s and getting, you can't like disco. You can't like singer-songwriter. You can't like country. I used to literally keep my country records in the closet. Like, I remember when I was starting to take my country records out of the closet because the punk bands started to embrace country. So the
Right.
X formed the Knitters, or Dwight Yoakam infiltrated the punk scene, or Rank and File, or Lone Justice, or the Long Riders, or all these Beat Farmers, all these bands. And all of a sudden, the same influences start to come out of punk rock for me. And like, this all kind of goes back to Chuck Berry. This all goes back to mountain music. And with both, again, I'll sort of tie this one on out. So with both the Ronstadt records and the sort of punk roots records, I was listening to Carter Family songs. I was listening to, Chuck Berry songs. I was listening to, uh, old blues songs or old blues riffs. And they were at the base DNA of both things as diametrically opposed as they were. I'm like, okay, this is just, you pick different off ramps to get off, but
Right.
that's what when anybody comes to me now and they have like I want to burn it all down attitude towards music, art, the business. First off, I'm like, fuck yeah, burn it all down. That's what you're supposed to do. I'm 100% for it, but you cannot burn it all down unless you know what you're burning down.
Right.
And there's a real sort of loss of history that's happening. I don't want to get too far off the road and politically and everything, but we're learning histories for the first time we never knew, and we're forgetting some that we did know, and we're ignoring others. And that's what bothers me, because like I said, like, I wanted to burn it all down. I burned down as much as I could, but I knew what I was burning down. I knew what I didn't like. I wasn't just lighting the living room on fire and going, I hope this gets whatever I
Right.
want to burn down. So anyway, I see this is what happens with me, man. I just talk and it's
Yeah,
early.
we want you to talk.
So I
That's
can
the whole point.
where
Right.
some underground said next.
That's the whole point. I mean, there's so many. Go ahead. You were about to say
Oh, no,
something.
to say, so I took the job at Elektra because I got offered a job from who I think is the legend of the 20th century, a gentleman named Seymour Stein. Went up, offered me a job there, and I came in and I had a little bargaining power. And being as many as I could, I probably could have turned that bargaining power into things like, I don't know, more money.
Money.
But I said, hey, can I make an X and a Linda Ronstadt box set? He was like, sure. So that's why I took the job at Elektra.
That's some serious music nerd shit in a way that I relate to, but I don't think exists very much anymore, or doesn't exist with younger people. But I don't know. Everything you've said is giving me like 100 different questions to
Oh,
potentially
yeah.
ask you. But I do want to go back to what you said about breaking into the music industry.
It just glitched, but you're right back. I see you.
That was weird.
There
I
you
don't
are.
have to. There I is.
And I'm good on time, man. So I'm in the
Okay.
rut.
I just want to make sure I'm still recording, which we are. Okay, cool. But, you came into the music industry, no college experience. You were just eager and wanted to work and you loved music. I came into the music industry at 17, no college, was just eager, loved music, wanted to work. That archetype, I don't think exists anymore.
No, it crushes me. Um, because I also was able to get an internship without going to college. It wasn't paid. I was working for free. I was getting, like I said, free records out of it. But no, it kills me now that, like, it's been pointed out to me, I would not be able to get the jobs I've had now without a college degree. Somehow the 19-year-old kid thing turned into a career. So meaning the whole idea was I'd try this out for a minute and then I'd have to go to college to learn something, or even if it was a junior college or, some sort of trade thing. And I had no other interest. I was driven towards nothing. So I was able to get this internship. And now at most companies, I know my company, I'm really proud of Concord for turning that around where you don't have to be a college student. to get work experience. Cause like I said, my thing was not, I was a lazy stoner. I wasn't going to college. Mine was like, I didn't really have a way in.
You
It
don't
was
have
a
resources.
new thing, didn't have the resources. And I didn't have the across the board grades because I wasn't interested in anything. I'm still not interested in math. I hate numbers more than anything. If I see numbers, I have this weird dyslexia with numbers. They freak me out. I don't like forms. I don't like, I'm very ADD or ADHD. I never got diagnosed, but I'm one of those things or all of those things. And went to school in a time where they didn't acknowledge the existence of those sort of things. So
Mm-hmm.
I did really well in the classes that interested me or where I had, and I did have a couple of really engaged teachers when I was a kid. Say teachers rule the world. I've had good teachers and bad teachers. When you have a good teacher, and I also could have a couple of them,
The world opens up.
world opens up, and you just know, like, there's those ones that are just counting the days to retirement, and the ones that are just like thrilled sharing this experience. And so, but again, like school wasn't an option, and it kills me now that like me at 19 or you at 17 would have a hell of a lot harder time getting in. And the one thing I would say too, in reference to the last thing, that the optimism I have now is because I think there are many generations in between us who were raised by a telephone and not, my most favorite word, content,
Mm-hmm.
the actual music. But now this generation that's coming up, I actually think they're the ones that are going to save us because they are getting, like what you and I would have loved, which was all access to all music.
Mm-hmm.
Do I wish they could figure out a way to actually pay the creators for it?
Yes.
But when,
100%.
when we were kids, if you heard about a record you wanted, it had to either be on the radio or a buddy of yours had to have it, or
Yep.
you had to have it.
Yep.
Otherwise, it was a mystery until you could get your hands on that record. And so, like, I know, like, 9, 10-year-old me, as I was combing through this and learning who, the staple singers were, or, like I said, like, Graham Parker, or whoever, Nick Lowe, whoever I was reading about in Cream and Circus Magazine on the back album covers, I wanted to hear the music so badly. Punk rock. I was reading about in magazines, in the local, like the LA Reader and the Weekly and Circus and Cream magazines. I wanted to hear what it sounded like because I saw what it sounded like, but there was no way. And kids now can do this, and they're not forced into the genre ghetto.
Yeah.
I think that's really healthy. If they want to hear punk, they're going to hear it. If they want to hear metal, they're going to hear it. If they want to hear K-pop, they're going to hear it. If they want to hear dubstep, they're going to fucking hear it. And I think that is great because that's the kind of childhood I had. It was not weird for me to listen to a Waylon Jennings song and an Earth, Wind and Fire song, and a, Red Cheap Trick song. They all made sense. And, and it wasn't until you got older and they're like, oh no, those don't belong on the same plate. And that's really because they're like, no, if we advertise to black kids and we put this music over here, then we can advertise directly to them. We could advertise to pop kids, country, every genre is then taken out. And it's incredibly unhealthy. And I think we've felt the damage of that because it's like saying you can only watch sitcoms the rest of your life, or you can only, see action movies. You can only eat Italian food. It just makes no sense. So now I think there's a real healthiness where kids are less restricted by genres and rules dictated by evil conglomerates like me to say, you can only listen to this.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? I wish that people, I wish that people thought critically more just on a regular basis every fucking day. That thought goes through my mind. I wish people thought more critically. But, speaking specifically in terms of the way that the music industry and advertisers like try to segregate things like music into genres that are based on demographics. Like if you're black, you should listen to this and not listen to this. if you're a girl, you should listen to this and not listen to this. If you're, queer, you should listen to this and not listen to this. And like, I don't know why that button kind of never really turned on for me. I grew up in an all black neighborhood, and, most of the people that I was around in my family listened to, disco and R&B and funk or whatever. But, I had someone who was very influential kind of in my younger years. We had a neighbor across the street who loved the Police. Like, he
Right.
named his dog Sting.
Right.
Loved the Police, loved Pat Benatar, and then, my folks kind of gave me free reign to watch TV. So I'd watch American Top 40 or America's Top 10 on TV and listen to American Top 40 on the radio. So I was hearing Men at Work and, Laura Branigan and, Kenny Rogers and, all this other stuff. And it's just like, you know, there was always a part of me that was like feeling a little weird sometimes about liking different types of music, especially once I hit high school and, teenagers are like, why do you listen to that? But to me personally, like when I'm in my room listening to music, it never felt weird to listen to different kinds of music.
Yeah. No, that's it's spot on, and that's what I mean. Look, I get the, you know, I grew up in the Valley, a white kid surrounded by white culture, so that's what I was hearing. The black music or Latino music or anything, I was only hearing it because it was floating through the radio, and I was a product of the radio. And you just hear these songs. Oh, and again, that's the problem, is when you're exposed to art, you don't just fall into, what's culturally acceptable or what's, what you're supposed to listen to, which is really a lesson taught by how we're programmed music. Now, of course, we're all going to grow up both nostalgia-like, and our DNA is set by what we hear as a kid. And that's totally, it's completely healthy. I think that's, how we all base, that's how we get our foundational stuff. But then to be open to exploring everything, it's insane that for so long I didn't realize it passed because we got the last bit of that. You could turn on the TV and watch multi-genre videos, MTV was forced to play Michael Jackson. But when they were, and it worked, then all of a sudden we got black music. Then we got hip hop. Then we got metal. Then we got, I was all being funneled in, and you liked what you liked and you liked what you didn't like, but you waited 3 minutes till the next thing.
Next video came on there. Something you like would show up eventually.
Yeah. And then literally they just figured out at one point, they're like, oh, we can micro market the stuff. So let's segregate everything and create more division. I mean, there's so many ways the business creates division and culture. Don't start with American Idol or The Voice, because I think that they're two of the worst things that have happened to American culture. By varying, I'm going to lose my career now for saying this, but by very nefariously putting out the intent that one person wins. And what that does to music communities is so destructive, and I think has been so destructive, because I grew up seeing these bands I like all play together. It's certainly in the punk scene. It was, you'd go to the shows, you'd see the other musicians in the audience, or they'd be telling you what bands to see or what records to buy. It was community. And if you look at any old, Stax tours, California rock tours, it was all these bands supporting each other,
touring together.
And then you got the American Idol thing, which came along, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's so great! Music is on TV." I'm like, "Not really."
Yeah.
It just sets that thing. It's like, yeah, you could be a community until it's time to win, and then only one of you is going to get a prize, and someone's going to go home second place. Not to mention the other people that we'll just forget about now. They're tainted, and it does. I think it does kind of taint. Like they kind of forcibly taint someone who doesn't win on these things. And so I think the generation coming up, I think, has more of a fuck that mentality, and they're just turned on what turns them on. And, as you were saying, they're the least locked into rules generation, be it gender identity, be it music, where we're seeing the chaos is coming from an older generation white knuckling it and not understanding change, but I see a generation coming up that really, um, on all levels, I really hope they retain this through their lives and carry this as adults, but really just wide open to relearning everything. And that, in for this particular conversation, really applies to the arts and music, which I
Right.
think is great.
Right. Absolutely. As an A&R person, and just, based on initial impressions, you seem like one of those A&R people who is motivated by talent in music and not by this person could potentially sell a ton of records or stream a lot of records and has this huge audience base and can make me a lot of money.
Yeah, definitely not that kind of anarchy.
You and I have been in the business for a while and we've seen a lot of things change,
Yes.
both in terms of the way music, obviously the way music is consumed, but also kind of just in terms of like, office culture. You hear all these stories about the way the music industry used to be and, was an incredibly toxic place.
Yeah.
Things have you noticed, that really sort of stick out for you? And what things haven't changed that kind of stick out to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, first off, just really quick, like I always describe my type of A&R as I've never been a Svengali A&R guy, meaning I have no interest in telling someone what to do. If someone comes to me and is like, this person has a great voice, what should they sing? I'm like, what do you want to sing? Like, I've been more interested when I meet someone, they already have an idea where they're going and who they are and self. Not to say the other kind of A&R is completely not only valid but necessary. I just don't have those talents. I'm not the guy that's going to come in and say, "Oh, you have a good voice. I think you should sing pop rock, or I think you should sing country rock." Everyone I've met that I've worked with has had an idea what road they're traveling on, and then if I understand that road, then I'll ride shotgun with them. I'll be like, "Great, I think I can help you get to that destination and keep you away from distractions and sort of keep you focused." I think that's my role as an AR person. To your bigger, more important question, when I got into the industry, it was, I mean, typically toxic, I guess you could say.
Explain that.
Yeah, meaning like going to record release parties at strip clubs, you know, being, cocaine and other drugs being done openly in the office, being classic sort of, we'll call it Mad Men sexism, racism, the people talking in a way that now I realize how people were talking, and it makes me so uncomfortable in the same way kind of seeing a John Hughes movie might make me uncomfortable. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, like they hated Asians. Like I didn't realize as a kid, but you realize these things you said. And I remember like, for a perfect example, when you'd identify someone who is a potentially dangerous male figure in the office towards, in this instance, I'm thinking of towards women specifically, or instances I'm thinking of, the goal was to make sure women were kept away from him and warned of him and protected from him rather than getting his fucking ass out
Out
of
of
it.
there. Right.
You know what I mean? And that was almost like what was just done. Like, okay, well, we can't eliminate this person. So all we can do is sort of try to protect these people. And I look back, I'm like, what a weak response that was.
Well, the issue there is that you're protecting potential victims, but I think more than that, you're protecting the victimizer.
Yes. Yes. No, absolutely. And you're giving it that, oh, boys will be
Boys
boys
be
kind of
boys.
attitude, and like this is just you have this job, you live next to a train track, this is what it is. And then again, as future generations started to like see things and go, this ain't acceptable. They've given courage to the older generations and to future generations to be bolder with this. But I remember specifically for me, my massive turning point. And look, I've always been, you know, I probably wouldn't have defined myself as this as a kid, but I certainly do now. I've always been a feminist. I've always been, you know, annoyingly liberal. Yeah, I was raised that way. I've always been annoyingly, equality and all because I'm a second generation American by, but Sicilian parents and a dad who was very dark skinned and grew up at a time when Italians were the Mexicans in New York. They were the bus drivers and the janitors and the maids and the doing all the jobs that the white man didn't want to do. My dad would
Yep.
get harassed for being Mexican when I was a kid because he was so dark skinned. So they raised us really sort of open mindedly and really simple, clear, concise. I got no questions, explanations of racism. Like it was funny whenever Bebe talks about like how do you talk to your kids about it? I'm like, my dad like broke it down like a Dr. Seuss novel once. And what if you were the only white person on an island and everyone else wasn't white and they were mean to you because you were white? I'm like, but I know it's, at 6 or 7 years old. And he's like, but what would you feel like? I'm like, but that isn't nice. And he's like, imagine how. And it was just like, boom, okay, I get it. I get it. That totally makes sense. Thanks, Dad. So I always grew up with sort of that attitude, but it wasn't until two things happened. The first was the Me Too movement. And when the Me Too movement happened, I can't remember when that was, like 10 years ago now, maybe, when it became a hashtag. And I remember when it became a hashtag, there was like a weekend where every woman I know was tagging on Facebook at the time was tagging Me Too with either their story or just simply as powerful, just the tag going like basically revealing how many women we knew had been victimized, felt unsafe, just put through horrible, either mental, physical, or just made to feel lesser.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm reading these, I'm going through it, and then I remember coming to both my nieces and who are grown women now, but both had hashtag, and I just started bawling. I'm like, oh my God, like they never talked to me about this. All these women that I knew were putting things on. I'm like, I didn't know their experiences. I was oblivious to it. So I started to ask the women I was close with if they want to share their experience so I could sort of learn from it. The Monday after all this was happening, I went to the office and my good friend Rachel Jacobson, who I worked with at Songs Music Publishing, really good friend of mine. I just said to her, I'm like, hey, so have you experienced sort of, Me Too stuff? And she kind of laughed. It's like, oh, yeah. And I was like, can you give me an example? And she was like, Friday. And I was like,
Jesus.
what? She was, and so it was frustrating. So like, you and I were in a meeting with a manager. I asked the manager a question and he responded to you. And it'd only been a couple of days. So I was able to recall it. But being a dumb guy, which I am, I'm not going to say, but like one that can learn and one that can, but I was like, oh my God. Then it was clear as day. I'm like, yes, I see that happening. Made me really aware of what was going on. And so at that moment, um, I became more conscious of not only my actions, but the actions, how I would interact with people and understand their actions. When their actions could be, you know, something that could make someone feel less than comfortable. The other was funny, it was that show The Watchmen.
Okay.
I was watching an episode of The Watchmen and they had, the Wall Street Massacre. So and I didn't know about Black Wall Street. I was never taught this history. I went and started to read about this incredibly horrible massacre that happened in a town that was never taught to us in school. And then I started to call my friends of color that I felt comfortable with and said, I know I grew up understanding racism, definitely understanding racism, but having the attitude from you know, my white experience that everything was always getting better. That was the lie I was telling myself. I was telling myself, it's like, yeah, it was horrible, but I looked at it as like slavery now and going, and my experience and what I'm seeing. And then that was a real wild time for me because I remember calling my buddy Jay and who were about the same age and was like, grew up in LA. I'm like, tell me about your experiences. Like, well, and I just remember he said, well, for one, I wasn't allowed to go outside without a t-shirt on. And I didn't understand that. And he's like, yeah, they didn't, want me to, look threatening or look like, look like I was imitating a gang member and I was like, I was never told what to wear. And you just went, just that one little statement made me go, shit, there's a whole lot that I'm missing from everybody's experience. And no, I will never, ever know everybody's experience or know how everybody's experience makes you feel. Those two, as an adult, as a full-fledged grown-ass man, were two things that really woke me up as far as, okay, you may walk the walk, as it were, but you don't necessarily understand. Again, understand what you want to burn down. For me, it was understand what you're fighting. Understand. It's just, so for me, it just comes from talking with people and
Yeah, I mean,
understanding. Yeah.
it's, everybody's experience is unique, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, or fortunately, actually, not unfortunately at all, very fortunately, we do not live in a black and white world. We live in a world where everybody has a very specifically unique experience. But I think that the more you take the time to listen to and empathize with the experiences of others,
Hmm.
particularly people who didn't have incredibly similar experiences to yours,
Right.
that's kind of how you grow as a human being.
Yes. Agreed. And look, that's to tie it all back together, that's the evolution of music. Like I said, it started with black mountain music,
That's right.
then flowed to mountain music, then flowed to country music. But we all, we all have the same mother. I don't necessarily look at it from a religious standpoint, but we all have the same mother. I mean, everything that we have is evolution, is you know uh, can be traced. You can trace all popular music, to rap music, 100%, 100% of everything.
So to hit the second half of that
Yeah.
question, what are you seeing or do you see that probably still needs to change?
Oh, racism, sexism, it's all still there. It's doing just fine, people. It's shoved down a little bit. I hope this is okay to say. Hate the man, I won't speak his name, that's been in charge of this country, who's ruined our lives for the last 10 years. And as we all know, he's made racism okay, allowed people to come out with it. So, again, a guy who always saw things improving, saw people who were sort of forced into their best behavior.
Hmm.
Like I said, I talk about my, second generation American status. My dad, who's very dark skinned. I'm very white presenting. I look like my mom, who's very fair skinned. I did not get my dad's looks. And I've never faced an ounce of racism like my dad did for being Italian. By the time I came along, we had The Godfather and our food was popular and they don't let me go. Yeah.
It's so funny, and not to cut you off.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that interests me that I don't see a lot now is even, I graduated high school in 1993,
Right.
and, my high school had a fair amount of white people in it, but they were not white. They were Russian, they were Italian, they were Jewish, they were whatever. And we are not too many years removed from a lot of white folks, particularly immigrant white folks, being seen as not much different from, your Mexicans, your Middle Easterners,
That's right.
your, whatever.
Absolutely. Now, my dad would tell, because my dad actually grew up in, they didn't have money. He grew up in Harlem. And, there was a little part of Italian Harlem and there was a Jewish Harlem but he was really integrated. And, but he tells the stories about, getting called a WAP, which stood for without papers, or
Is that
Guinea.
what WAP stands for?
That's what I've always been taught. Yeah, without papers.
Holy shit.
And everything comes from a derogatory thing. But my dad, like I said, was very, very dark skinned. And so even as a kid, I remember driving on once and, he would get called a horrible racial slur for Mexicans or get an egg thrown at his car. And so I grew up very sort of aware of that. But at the same point, going out into the world, I was around people who felt very comfortable talking about race because I'm a white guy. There's nothing about me that you look at except I tan really well in the summer because I've got greasy skin. So when you get behind the door, we'll call it the white male club, which I'm certainly in and was certainly accepted in, you hear things. People drop their guard a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the sad thing is, since we've had this, I can't even call it leadership, this train wreck of individuals who've come in to destroy our our way of life, it's made people more comfortable using terms segregating in their conversations, casual racism, casual sexism. And so it's still there. It's not as loud as it was, but it's not as quiet as it was before dipshit. And so those things still exist. I tend to really hear it on what would probably be considered non-dramatic ways or something like, I just happen to sign a lot of females. Like I love female singers and writers and musicians. And I just, for whatever reason, I have like a good number of them, and not in my company. My company's been, I'm not just saying this to be a company. I'm very, very like happy where I landed and the type of culture this company has. But when I go out and I'll play someone a couple of things, they're like, well, we've already got, a female singer slated for the fall. I'm like, how many white guys you have slated for the fall?
Mm.
How many guys you have slated for the fall? And people feel comfortable saying that. And people that I know are not, are good people. But all of a sudden that's been something you can sort of say. Like, and that's one I've never seen really go away. It's really funny. And it's primarily around women. It's like, well, we've got 3 women coming out. So I think we're full there. And it's like, and you hear from people that you go like, I know you don't feel this way, but you've sort of been programmed over time to make that be an answer.
Right.
That's an answer. It's horrible.
How does that get called out? Like,
I
without,
just call them out at
okay.
this. I just call it out. I'm just like, and when you say it to someone, you can see the person get embarrassed and realize what they're saying. And then when that happens, then I'd go for a gentler approach. Then I'm like, all right, no, you get it. You get it. Isn't that weird? And very rarely, if ever really, will I get someone to fight an argument to that and sort of say, no, you got to understand it. But that's what I mean. It's like, those are the subtle things that just become acceptable. Just like all those John Hughes movies. As a kid, I wasn't bothered by them. Like there's jokes about like date rape in these movies. And I was like,
Yep.
laugh along with everyone else, and it's so funny when you watch something now, that's evolution. We all like, you can keep learning, you can keep growing. And certainly like as a kid, it kills me. I know I said things like gay as a negative. I know I said things like the R word, just flippantly casual. My teachers taught me how to say Indian giver. And to me, that simply meant don't take what's mine. Indian giver. Like, holy shit. Don't teach kids that, which we don't
Yeah.
anymore. Or
I mean,
sing that.
there was a whole hit record before my time called Indian Giver.
Insane.
Yeah.
Insane.
Look, I mean, so like I said, go ahead.
We learn from it. And that's
Yes,
things
you
like,
learn from it.
we all learn from it and you grow beyond. So I don't punish my younger self because I didn't know that was wrong. I am, I'm embarrassed that I did, but I admit it because I'd be lying about my past. I didn't say that's so gay for a movie I didn't like because that was taught to me as for some reason a negative.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then you get older and you're like, oh shit, but I'm never saying that again. And that's things like with people that get upset, like people that get upset that they can't say that anymore. Those are the people I've got zero tolerance for.
As
People
you
that
should.
said it that don't want to talk about it. I'm like, that's fine. Just as long as you don't do it anymore, that's learning. But anyway, I cut you off.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No, no, that's fine. I mean, I think that's the whole like purpose of being humans, right? Is growth. And look, I've said this a million times before. Like, I will acknowledge having used probably every horrible term in the book to
Yeah.
describe people in my past. Like, and I am an out queer man, and I have used the word faggot a million times as
Well,
a pejorative. As a young person before I came out. Um, and it's like, when you know better, you do better. And if you do better, again, it's all about like learning. You know, do I wish my 17-year-old self or my 25-year-old self had been maybe a little bit more sensitive to stuff like that? Absolutely. Was I working through some shit? Absolutely. Would I, at my age now, like use that terminology to describe other people? Absolutely not. And, I think that's kind of the point.
and we learned a lot, and that's why I mean, like, music taught me so much. As a kid, I have this arm was a full Stax tattoo because the first record I got as a kid for my brother to keep me out of his collection was a Santa Dave record. And so it was my very first record. So I had that sex, but then I became kind of obsessed with my brother really liked Stax stuff. And when I would get older, in the beginning, when I was a little kid, I was just into the groove of these songs. I love Motown. I absolutely love Motown, but Stax just hit me. It was swampier. It was groovier. It wasn't as like the Motown thing were flawless, unimpeachable pop songs, sung by the best singers in the world, but they were sort of made to infiltrate mainstream radio,
Yeah.
which they did and changed the world with.
Right. They were created to cross over.
They were created crossover. As, Stax was a little peek behind the curtain. And some of those songs came through. But when I got older and I started to listen to the lyrics to Respect Yourself, there was a pretty little kid at probably like 12 years old, 13 years old. I saw Wattstack and it broke my mind because I wasn't aware of these different cultures. And so somewhat was taught to me through music. And the rest is really from shared experience and talking to people. And it's funny because I grew up at a time where um, I don't want to say acceptable, but things were accepted. Meaning, like, I grew up with gay kids. I grew up with kids of minorities and, religions. And, grew up in L.A. Where I went to school was pretty white. But in coming out to L.A. in the Valley, especially when I was like 13, 14, 15, and started to like really get into music and explore the outside world, you meet people from different experiences and you learn about them. But it wasn't until, I forget the awful ex-athlete Kardashian, Bruce Jenner. Just man, what a piece of
Piece
uh,
of work. We'll say
yeah,
piece of work.
it was work.
Yeah.
Uh, but when that whole thing happened, where he was transitioning, and pronouns were coming in, and I was like every other white guy, I was completely confused by everything. And I had my friend, the aforementioned Rachel Jacobson, who I spoke of in the Me Too story. I would say she was my woke coach. And she was taking me through, like, helping me understand what they meant, when it was appropriate, how in the world could someone be a they, she? I don't get it. What is this? What is pan? What is hetero? What is, like, just explain everything to me. And so she was just like my school teacher. And I'd still go in. I'm like, can I refer to, is it an insult to refer to a man that's transitioned to she? Or is that like, what do you do? Or, and so she's taking me through the whole thing. And it struck me so hard at that point because then I learned that a kid I didn't know well, but a kid that I'd gone to high school with, who was on the football team in my high school. My coach said I didn't know him, but we knew each other.
Hmm.
Had transitioned some years later, and someone just said like, "Oh, so and so transitioned," and I just hit that moment where I knew what gay kids went through, but it was in an age where they were brave enough. It was California. They were able to come out. They still had to go through. I can't imagine, what you went through, what they went through, what the psychological thing is. But in the era we grew up and in the geography we grew up, it was a much easier thing to do than it was probably in the South or in a fundamentalist Christian family. So kids were coming out. So we did that, but I'd never known in my life a trans person. I'd never known someone who like re-identified their gender into a number of ways that I couldn't really understand. But it struck me when I heard about this kid and how incredibly like hard his life must have been, because I knew the community I grew up in, like said, they would probably begrudgingly accept homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Trans, any kind of gender questioning, any kind of identity of something other than you're assigned at birth, absolutely not. A football player in Thousand Oaks, California, no, that wasn't going to work. And it just struck me, and it really made me incredibly conscious. And like, because I have not been around that much of it, considering my age, my experience of people that were re-identifying or explaining their true gender, and just seeing the hate that was coming forward to it. And then it just struck me. I'm like, wait a minute. We loved Tootsie. We loved Mrs. Doubtfire. We watched that Tom Hanks show.
Bosom buddies.
Buddies, exactly. Klinger on MASH. I mean, go back further. Flip Wilson and Milton Berle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, drag was always a part of, I mean, literally go back to Shakespeare. It was like, it emanated there because women couldn't act. Weren't allowed to act again. And it just was one of those moments that I realized, like, though I had empathy for it, I never considered it because I didn't know someone going through the experience. I didn't know what it was. It really struck me how manufactured it was. The dislike, the hatred.
The outrage, yeah.
The outrage. And then when you start to read, learn, then you go back and you find the sources of racism, of discrimination, of sexism, of homophobia, of Islamophobia, of xenophobia, of whatever phobia there is, comes down to religious or financial reasons. All of it. Or political reasons, which are financial reasons. But so we're still learning. And I think the reason we have trouble learning, because I learned only recently something I didn't know, is that the world, not the US, but the world population has literally doubled in the last 40 years from 4 billion to 8 billion. So part of that's going to be the US. Part of that is going to be way more overcrowded schools, more kids living in, poverty situations where they're not going to be able to leave their street, their town, much less their state or their country, which is how you learn. People just literally discouraged from reading books. People, they want us in a matrix, and I'm a part of it, man. I use my phone as much as anybody else, and I can hark back to a time when I didn't have it. But it does, it limits communication with each other, it limits talking, it limits reading, it limits all these things. And so, but again, I want the new generation to be a little more patient with people. That's my gripe. Like, if someone misgenders you and they're sorry and you have to explain it to them, explain it to them. Help them learn. If they say fuck you when you're misgendered, then fuck them. Say whatever you want to them, do whatever you want. But the immediate sort of cancellation of someone that may misgender a female identifying person as she, or vice versa, a male identifying person as he, or a female, or any sort of combination, a lot of it is learning. And so I learned from kids that really took the time to help me understand the why, the how, the when of all these things, and how things could be fluid. Because I was in the beginning. I remember the first time I heard about it, a friend of mine told me that his daughter was identifying as they. I remember I was in San Francisco meeting with a musician, And I walked out there and he's explaining it to me. And I walked out and I called my best friend. I'm like, do you know this thing about kids identifying as they? And he was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, I don't really get it. But some kids identify as they, them. And it was retraining the brain to understand. And then as it started to come out more and more and more, you 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 learn it. I'll screw up sometimes, because if it's
We're
not
human.
obvious, yeah. But it's like if someone corrects me, I'm like, I'm so sorry. Thank you for pointing it out. I've seen people, it hasn't happened to me, but I've seen people just get attacked for accidentally saying the wrong gender. I'm like, that's just a dumb thing every generation does. That was me with punk rock. That was me saying, you're not in my club, so fuck you, I'm excluding you, which is exactly what punk rock wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be inclusive of
Inclusive of everybody. Exactly.
and it was in one way, but then you get these kids that come in and be like, no, it's my club. So, but this generation's coming out is forcing that hand.
Right.
And people, like anything else, like, look, maybe 1 or 2 generations before us, kids were being punished for writing left-handed, which I can't fathom it was happening. Like 1 generation before us, women weren't able to vote. I mean, when you go through all that stuff, you're like, okay, we've just got to. And my brother is the one that constantly reminds me of this, that what's happening to the world right now, as miserable, as infuriating, as dividing as it is probably necessary to get us
To wherever we need to go.
wherever we're going.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with so much of what you said. I mean, I've certainly had my hand slapped, and I've slapped hands before for, perceived slights. And as someone with privilege in some ways and not privilege in other ways, I do understand that sometimes, a big thing for me in 2020 was I don't have the capacity to explain blackness to you.
Right. And I understand that completely. Yes.
And I get that mindset, but also I worry a lot about how graceless so many of us that are minorities have become. And I think that when people that are not like us make an honest attempt to try to learn,
Mm-hmm.
if we have the capacity, we have the responsibility to be teachers. Because if everybody shuts down the people who are trying to learn, then those people are just going to be like, well, fuck y'all. I'm just going to stay
Right.
on my side and, whatever. So and look, we all have blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
A big misnomer is the idea that gay people are, gay, bi, pan, whatever people. And I'll rephrase that. The idea that sexuality and gender are completely linked, and they are not.
Right. Right.
I am very firmly cisgender.
Mm-hmm.
I have never felt any real conflict with my gender, but I certainly, am not heterosexual. And I didn't meet another trans person, or I didn't meet a trans person until I was in my 30s,
Right.
probably in like my late 30s. Uh,
And, oh, no, I'd always say you met your first out trans person.
right. My first
We
out
all
trans
had
person.
trans people before that. They were
Yes.
just very closeted. That's the thing.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. And I've certainly misgendered people. It took a minute to understand. It took a minute for me to be comfortable with. And, I was able to generate the empathy to be like, look, I personally don't feel awkward in my gender presentation, but I certainly understand that people do. And, their right to exist is the same as my right to exist. But, I also feel like you got to give people grace for like fucking up, as long as they're not like fucking up in ways that like completely mess up your like personhood or put you in harm's
Yeah.
way or anything like that.
Exactly. And that's what I mean. I think we can, you can identify the people that, like you said, want to grow and people that are just annoyed by it. People are annoyed by it, like whatever.
Fuck
But
them.
at the same point, because I was that white guy to my black friends and my, gay friends and my Mexican friends and my Jewish friends and everything throughout life, gone like, explain this to me. And I don't think at all it's the responsibility in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, which we all like, we don't talk about that enough. we witnessed a murder. We witnessed a hate crime rather, over us at a murder, and it shut us all down. And I'm going to my Black friends going, help me understand. And they're going, help me understand. Help me process what I just saw and how it's being argued that this guy with his knee on this guy's neck, people are defending, like, help me. So I don't think it's necessarily everyone's point to be a teacher all the time if they're mad and they don't want to. But my thing is, if you can identify the person that just needs to learn, help them learn. There's going to be plenty of people that don't want to learn. They deserve none of your, and when I say you, I mean everyone's attention, my attention. I will help pass the knowledge I've learned on to someone. But if they don't want to learn it, it can get aggressive. It just can. Or I'll just ignore it and be like, okay, that person's a lost cause.
Yeah, be like, fuck them. There are other people to concentrate on.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I mean. Look, I do believe through all we're going on. This may be as naive as the other beliefs I've held in my life, but I see a loud minority right now screwing us all up, and I do see a quiet majority that I do think is going to win. And when I say win, it might be past our lifetimes because evolution has to go away.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think this kick-started, like, how are you going to treat people? How are you going to be treated through this life? And kids that just see a world that we and the boomers have really screwed up for them in a lot of ways. Us by being pretty, like I said, the aforementioned, when I watch old movies now, I'm like, oh my God, I see it now. We didn't really help. They're really, going, no, this is bullshit. This is going to change. And I just see whether or not they maybe understand the reasoning for various ways of identifying or the nature versus nurture aspect of human sexuality or anything, which I think is just healthy. They kind of just don't care what you are. And that is what I think is great. And yet we have these, older white men are like, wait, Somalians, let's go after them. Let's go after, I love more than anything. I love it when Christians go after Muslims because it's like, oh, right. You had Kenny Loggins, Jesus. Let me tell you a story about Jesus. He doesn't look like that. If you believe in him and you read those books, he doesn't believe in him. And I got something else to break it to. This was my dad's thing. What he always made me question any side of kind of fundamentalist or religion in general. He was like, okay, so you accept that Jesus, good name for Middle Easterner, don't question the name. It's a Middle Eastern dude. But somehow his buddies were Matthew, Mark, John, Luke, I don't know, Steve, Bob, Dave. They're like, it's like all this westernized thing. And then they'll talk to people about it. And I'll talk to fundamentalists. I'm like, do you really believe Jesus was hanging out with Matt? And they'll be like, well, that was just, it may be interpreted over time and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, so what else was? Everything was. I look at the Bible, anybody who follows it and follows it for the right reasons, God bless you. If you're into religion, I look at the same way as how you identify. If you're not harming people, that's great.
Amen.
I look at the Bible as Harry Potter that has been rewritten for 300 years. And I have a feeling that the next Bible will be Harry Potter. And slowly there will be Harry Potter will be the Jesus figure because it teaches a lot of the same lessons, except we've learned lately, except we're going to have to eliminate trans people from the story. But, or we'll work them in later. Who knows?
The stories will exist outside of the person who wrote them.
Well, and it's like, everything is taught. Everything is taught. And it's like, and you only learn it by conversation. You only learn it by reading and visiting and traveling. And there's so much to read and there's so much to learn. There's so much to watch. And we now have ultimate access to all information. And that's the reason we have people in there trying to create disinformation, lead you to different places. But I was able to learn about Black Wall Street because of the internet. And then was able to read it and go, how the fuck am I at my advanced age just learning about
about
it?
this.
How am I just learning about Juneteenth? You know, I'm talking about just the last like 7, 8 years whenever it became into white consciousness, you know, and then it became a day we started to get out from work. So everyone knows Juneteenth, but, you know, I think we're kind of celebrating it like we do Columbus Day. Meaning no one really knows what it means,
Right.
you know, but
Right. You're
we're
right.
getting there. We're getting there. Hopefully. Hopefully we're getting there.
Yeah, man. Can I lightning round you real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's lightning round.
Go.
Where do you find your people?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't know. It's funny though. I was talking about this. It's funny how you find your people. I was talking about that in life because I really love one of my favorite expressions that's come directly from gay culture is chosen family,
Mm-hmm.
which I learned came from, if I'm correct, from individuals who were abandoned during the AIDS era by their families that found their chosen families to be their actual families. But I love the idea of the majority of my family that I identify are not blood relatives. I've just found my family through life. But for me personally, I guess I find everything's music for me. Since I've been a little kid, my experience is 100% music. I mean, I don't really care about sports. I don't really care about movies. So it's usually surrounded by music somehow. Either I find a commonality with someone with music, I've met someone through my job, but when you find your people, it's almost magnetic now. Like you just kind of know your people you run into, and I'm like so happy with my community, my chosen family. So, you know, my family's got real small over the years, parents and just relatives dying off, and ones we don't speak to, and I have this family that and nephews that are not mine, and it's just like this,
I get it.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
sorry, long-winded answer to that. Lightning,
No,
not a lightning answer. Sorry about that.
it's fine. What would you say are the most traditionally masculine, traditionally least masculine things about you?
Oh, my voice and my beard.
I
I can
mean,
grow
your
a beard
beard
in
is
like
bearding
7
right now.
seconds. Yes, I could grow a beard in like 7 seconds. Yeah, probably appearance and sloppiness, inability to cook, slow learning, and was the other one least masculine things?
Yeah, at least traditionally
Or
masculine, because
traditionally masculine. I mean,
masculinity is a spectrum.
yeah, I proudly call myself a feminist. I think the world should be handed over 100% to non-white men. Like, at this ticket, son, we've had a run. We've sort of fucked it up. Let's give someone else a shot. But I've always, it's funny, even as a kid, like talk about like Ronstadt or Chrissy Hind or Joplin or any of these people I heard growing up, I've always been intrigued by female voices, female musicians. And they were always played as an equal voice in my house from my sister and my brother. So I'd hear Carole King and Janis Joplin as much as I'd hear, Chrissy Hind or Joan Jett or Pat Benatar or whoever. Females run very strong in my family and very equal in my families. I grew up not really being taught to respect or like women. I grew up to just know really strong women. And then through my career, oddly enough, I have worked for a large number of women who have been my bosses. And I've worked for men who've been my bosses. And women are way, way fucking better bosses, better teachers, better mentors. I've had some great, great male role models. Don't get me wrong. But I'm in the arts and I learn a lot of the business from the men and a lot of the empathy and joy of art and importance of art from women.
Awesome. That's an awesome answer. And that actually leads right into my next question, which is what brings you joy? Don't say music.
Music. It is though, man. It's finding commonality with someone in music. It's seeing someone discover music. Right now, I'm watching my nephews who are uh 14 and 15, who are as removed from the music business as they could be, um, but are absorbing it and it's becoming part of their lives. And watching how they get it, you know, it's funny, their whole world seems to start with Shazamming something and then moving to playlist. You know, my older nephew was great. Like he was this real Stranger Things kid, and he was just obsessed with that show. So he became one of those Kate Bush kids. And he was like driving his family crazy playing Run Up That Hill
Yep.
over and over and over. And so he came over one day and he was like, "Can you play me more Kate Bush?" And he's like 12 at the time. So I'm like, "Yes." And I grabbed up my arms and I started playing him like Babushka and Wuthering Heights. And he's like, "Yeah, no thanks."
I just want that one song.
Which I don't know why I would have been ready for at 12 either. Watching them experience music brings me joy. Animals bring me joy. Watching victories for the good guy brings me joy. Watching a generation that I think is, despite us fucking up the path for them, I think is determined to do as much good work as they can brings me joy. Yeah. I like Taco Bell too.
You know, I mean,
Really, really brings me joy. And so the old syndicate guys used to have the Taco Bell coupons. It was great.
God, if
Gets
Taco
the Taco
Bell can
Bell.
bring you joy and not ruin your insides, kudos to you.
Exactly. Well, I'm not saying that. I'm not
Okay.
salmonella 6 or 7 times. I'm saying that's my
Sure,
Achilles heel.
sure. Although,
When we live
to
in
be
LA,
fair,
it's trying like great Mexican food, but yeah, no,
right.
we'll go.
I was, I was, I was talking to, I don't know if I was talking to somebody, if I was reading something, and they were like, you know what? Out of all the fast food chains, Taco Bell is actually the healthiest.
Is it really? Man, and when I go there, I go incognito. I mean, that's the best thing about Uber Eats now. It's like delivery. It's like just bring the porn and leave it on the porch.
God, I mean, don't be shameful about enjoying Taco Bell.
I live 2 minutes from the most authentic
That is
Mexican food in the
fair.
world, and yet I just want salt.
That's fair.
That's why I
That's
just
fair.
want salt.
That secret, whatever the secret ingredient
Exactly, with
in Taco
salt.
Bell is.
Yeah.
Oh, God. And my closing question is always to sort of turn the tables a little bit and have the guest ask me a question. So I'm putting you on the spot.
What have you learned from doing this podcast?
What have I learned from doing this podcast? That is a really good question. One thing is that we're all sort of searching. I think that everybody that I've spoken to really wants to be a better version of themselves or the best version of themselves. You know, this podcast has, you know, when I'm feeling misanthropic,
Mm-hmm.
this podcast kind of levels that out and makes me sort of believe in the good of people. You know, I've made some incredible friends and strengthened some friendships through doing this over the years. So I don't know if I've learned like a specific thing, but I do know that doing this gives me, you know, gives me hope, gives me life, gives me, you know, a little bit of positivity, you know, for the present and the future.
That's amazing. The reason I wanted to do it is because you're coming at it for that very thing I was talking about, which is commonality. And you do fun because they're trying to train us as much to make you and I feel different from each other,
We're
to make
not.
all of us siloed off and feel different. And it's conversations like this that really I think illustrates to people. And I think it's important to talk about, like, you know, how we've learned through life. And I think for just from listening to some of the things before I came on, is there's a lot of talk about growth. There's a lot of talk about, like, you know, just because you thought this way at one point doesn't mean you can't grow and change it. You know, I'm watching some really thoughtful people come forward and explain why they're leaving MAGA, because I've been learned to hate all of it. But when I listen to them and understand the reasonings for going in it, some of them are horrible, but some of them are literally like they haven't left their state. They don't know more than what they see. They see coastal elites. They see poverty in their own areas. They see someone offering them that they were taken over. And when they are learning things, like some people are like, if you voted that way, I'm never accepting you again. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. If someone is that way, yeah, write them off. If someone is racist, sexist, if someone just bought into a wrestling match, which is all this fucking administration has done,
Mm-hmm.
entire accomplishment is to turn politics into WWF and create a sort of Iron Sheik versus, you know, whatever Hulk Hogan's sort of battle of, you know, morality. But I think like what you do, and just to compliment you, I think these are the voices we need to hear to have these conversations about, you know, this commonality and how we are empathetic to each other. And sometimes we do have the quietest voices though. So anybody like yourself that's going to go out and talk about things and show these commonalities, I think you're doing a great service.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I mean, I think about like this is obviously real life, but I think about my real life and the people that I interact with. And the people that I interact with are, in a lot of cases, like aesthetically different from who I am. I
Sure.
interact with people of, multiple different, racial and ethnic identities, sexualities, whatever it is, but they're cool people. I want to, and we have far more in common than we do not in common. And you can get over that hump of the things that you don't have in common by being open to learn and being open to empathy and, all of those things. I mean, and at the end of the day, like all we got is each other. So why not, try to fortify your experience, your life, your world, your limited time on this earth with as many people as possible.
Amen.
So
Amen.